Vagante can surprise players, as the game offers thoughtful challenges while making playthroughs unique enough that repeating sections isn't much of a chore. Even with pixel art and a Spartan soundtrack, the foundation of this game promotes decision making and maneuvering through procedurally generated levels. Bear with me, as there's a bit to break down with this game. Music in this game is Spartan. Music starts soft in earlier dungeons, but the music can intensify as players go deeper, as well as becoming more epic the moment players fight boss characters. The soundtrack isn't really memorable, but it satisfies their purpose. As mentioned earlier, the game uses pixel art, creating a lighter atmosphere despite the consequences that can be given during the game. This allows Vagante to offer arcade-like vibes. Sprites are designed competently that they're big enough for players to appreciate the unique designs of them, as well as react properly to their attacks thanks to visual cues. This retro style is compensated with gameplay, so let's examine what exactly there is to do in Vagante. One of the nice things about pixel art games is that they often have low system requirements to offer smooth frame rates. Some adjustments have to be made here and there to ensure that the game runs at the minimum 60 FPS, but it isn't really much. Vagante can be played with both controllers and keyboard. When playing with controllers, the game supports cross-input and direct input controllers. The only thing to note though is that cross-input is supported by default. If a player wants to use direct input controllers, then the support for direct input controllers has to be enabled in the settings menu. The default controls for the keyboard are all neatly placed, so the left hand never changes its position, allowing players to focus on the action. There's no apparent leaning towards any input device, making the player's choice of input device a matter of preference. Vagante can be described as a roguelike platformer. Players gain experience and items as they progress through the game and kill enemies, while having to move around obstacles. In single player, if a character dies, that character is gone for good, and players must restart from the very beginning. Players progress in two ways. The most basic is that their characters gain levels as they kill enemies. Killing a level boss automatically levels up a character. When a player fully levels up, they must use a bonfire first to gain a skill point. There's also a progression level that players fill. Players earn points for their progression level when the game ends with either the character dying or the game being completed. This amount is determined by the character's level and the stage they were in when the game ended. Players gain different bonuses as the progression level increases. Players fill the progression level until its maximum level of 16. This incentivizes players early on to continue playing regardless of their numerous deaths. The game consists of 4 stages, with each stage having 3 levels: Cave, Forest, Catacombs, and Rift. All of these levels are procedurally generated, so it encourages players to learn the unique designs of each stage. The second level of each stage has an alternate level that players can enter at the cost of a golden key. These keys can be acquired after killing a level boss, but can also be used to open a level's locked treasure chest that contain powerful weapons and potions, thus players must think about how they want to use their keys. Traps are usually placed around different parts of a level, with some traps being stage-specific. Some of these traps are non-lethal, while there are those that can kill. Traps are double-edged though, as they can also hurt enemies as well. This is useful because some traps only trigger once and don't rearm, killing 2 birds with 1 rock. For example, as players explore the caves, they encounter boulder traps, which release a boulder that lands on top of the triggered pressure plate, killing players and weaker enemies sandwiched between the boulder and the ground. These boulders are useful when brought out because they can serve as platforms that players can jump onto to reach higher elevated sections of a level. Traps can be overcome when players have enough experience in dealing with them, or even equip gear that reduce the lethality of traps. When used in tandem with procedural generation, these traps promote the player's presence of mind, as well as a player's ability to maneuver in the game. Merchant shops appear in every level. These merchants are willing to give players a useful item if the price is right. Players do have the option of stealing an item from the merchant, but this makes merchants attack the player throughout the playthrough, requiring players to think about their actions. Fairies from time to time can be found in a level, imprisoned. Carrying the fairy after killing all the enemies in the level should be a priority, as carrying pixies provide the player an opportunity to get different boons. There are different offerings placed throughout the game. These offerings provide different bonuses when the player gives currency or items, from giving equipment for a chance to get a new equipment, to paying 20 gold to regain a certain amount of HP, to even improving a cursed item into a non-removable, more powerful item. These offerings can be broken as well, but affect the players in different ways, with majority of these effects being adverse. It is recommended to use these offerings before leaving a level, as there is no way to return to a cleared level. When the player exits a level, they enter an intermission area. There are usually two objects that players can interact with in that area: a bonfire and a giant book. The bonfire heals 20 HP by default and grants a character a skill point. Spell books and scrolls can also be thrown into the bonfire to heal a character for additional HP. If a player was carrying a chicken or a corpse of certain monsters, those fall into the bonfire and become cooked food, which can grant different buffs when consumed. The giant book can save the progress of a character and return them to the character select area. Players can then take a break and continue where they last left off by interacting with the giant book just by the entrance. The progress made though is lost when that character dies. In addition to that, if a player carries a fairy all the way to the intermission area, the fairy heals the player for a certain amount of HP. When players first start out, they can choose to play one of three classes. This is done by pressing the start button and choosing a character template of that class. In addition to choosing a character, players can also equip a background on that character with buffs and debuffs that players must balance. Most backgrounds are acquired by achieving certain progression levels, but additional backgrounds can be acquired by doing certain tasks while playing, pushing players to do well in their playthroughs. This is important to note because this is not addressed when starting a game, and is especially problematic when a player starts the game for the very first time. Knights are the tanks of the game. They usually start with swords and have the highest HP among the starting classes. Investing points into the sword tree allows players to do more damaging attack with their swords, as well as attack in different directions, which is useful to fight enemies above or below the player. Knights can also ignore falling damage if players put a point into the angelic tree, as well as summon light that deals damage to enemies whenever their sword deals damage with further investment. Knights also have strong defenses when investing points into the shield tree, such as having the ability to block attacks and have reduced damage while stunned. Rogues have lower starting HP, but are more agile characters, and start with a dagger and bow. Placing skill points in the dagger tree allows players to fight at mid-range by making daggers work as boomerangs that return upon use. Investing points into the bow tree easily provides mobility to rogues, as well as increasing damage output. Rogues are also able to move around faster by rolling if a point is invested into acrobatics. They can also invest points into stealth to sneak around enemies, but isn't always useful since killing bosses gives a free skill point and nearby monsters will gang up in a fight. Mages are Vagante's default spellcasters. They are equipped with 2 spells and a wand when starting out, and have the lowest starting health pool in the game. When playing solo, a point in spellcasting always helps out because one of the 2 starting skills, Ice Blast, has slow casting speed, and is more useful of the 2 since it freezes enemies in place. Quick spell switching is often key when playing alone, since the other spell, Arc Lightning, does more damage. Mages can also dabble with enchantments and alchemy. By investing in enchantments, players can cast spells and weapons, imbuing them with magic properties depending on the spell used. With 1 point in alchemy, mages can identify potions in their inventory after using a bonfire. Wildlings are the 4th class in the game, available when the player has reached progression level 3, and the only class that doesn't start with any equipment. Wildlings can use points in the fist tree to attack in different directions and unleash a barrage of punches. When the player starts investing points into the berserk tree, wildlings can become berserk as they attack more, and putting points into this tree allows players to take reduced damage and gain life for each hit made while in this state, incentivizing players to maintain aggression as a means to survive. Investing points into the nature tree gives wildlings the ability to knock back enemies with a roar, as well as do a ground slam attack while airborne. Players can acquire different items in the game. No class is limited to the kind of armor, accessories, and weapons that can be equipped. Melee weapons have a variety of attack speeds and damage output, but most types of weapons are ignored when players focus on certain weapon types for their character builds. Wands are unique melee weapons because if the melee attack button is held long enough, the wands use a charge to cast a spell. Wand users can regain charges for their wands by physically attacking with their wands. There are 3 categories of ranged weapons in the game: bows, boomerangs, and bombs. Bows require arrows to deal damage. Arrows in the game have a chance to not break and can be picked up and used again on contact. Boomerangs, on the other hand, deal damage without any ammo, but need to be picked up again to use them. Bombs are destroyed upon use, often requiring players to think of when to throw the bombs. All of the items in the game, though, are, by default, identified upon use. Equipment will often have 2 kinds of text. Green or red text affect the character's stats. Blue or pink text gives players special abilities that aren't available by default. If an item has a red text and says cursed when equipped, they can't be unequipped, and the only way to remove the curse status on an item is with the Scroll of Uncurse. This makes players wary of what they equip and think about how they want to identify their items. Potions can affect players positively or negatively, but once identified, they're identified throughout the rest of the session. This also applies to scrolls as well. Spellbooks are always identified and describe what a spell a character can learn upon reading. If the player reads a spellbook of a spell already learned, that spell becomes stronger. With enough practice and experience, players will be able to figure out which item stats are the best for the build they are playing with, and items can have different uses when trying to finish the game. The game isn't just limited to a player playing alone though. As a matter of fact, the game's dynamics change when more people play together. Up to 4 players can play in both offline and online. When playing offline, players just have to enable the number of players that can play offline in the settings menu. This can be done in the main menu or in the character select menu when starting. Combine the game's responsiveness with gamepads and its ability to use both direct input and cross-input controllers, with the option to have up to 4 players in an offline game, and players can have a fun couch co-op experience. To play online, players simply choose the Play Online option in the main menu. Lobbies don't appear upon loading, so it's required to refresh the list to make sure that they're open games. Players can choose to host their own lobbies. While playing online, lag can be noticeable when playing with 400 ms. If anything, players should be playing with 300 ms at most to ensure that there's no delay while playing. With multiplayer games, the dynamics of progressing and clearing areas change. All items are instant, meaning that players have to share among themselves the items that are dropped. Experience is shared, so players gain the same amount of experience if one player kills a monster. This means that all players level up if a boss is killed. If a single player dies in a session, that player becomes a skeleton and can still fight. If they die again, they become specters that can only navigate the area. A player can be revived if another player interacts with the dead player's grave. The player will be left with 1 HP, but they can re-equip items in their inventory and use the bonfire to level up if the boss was killed. If all players die at least once, then the session ends and they must start from the very beginning. Communication is key in these sessions because knowing how to share items and contributing in the group makes the group stronger and increases the chances of finishing the game. Mages shine in multiplayer and are often required in a session because of their enchantment skill and potion identifying skill. Knights can tank for the group, especially with blocking. Rogues and wildlings help by dealing a lot of damage. Players with more in-game knowledge about bosses will often talk about the common patterns of bosses to ensure that there's at least one member alive. If playing offline or online with keyboard, then communication shouldn't be much of a problem. Problems can arise though if players are playing with controllers. The game has no local voice support, which will require players to use third-party programs such as Steam or Discord. This problem especially shines when playing with people who aren't your friends in Steam or can't be communicated easily on Discord. Despite that, multiplayer is a fun experience and highly recommended as players can learn more about the game. Vagante has a simple design with many intricacies to it. The game is highly recommendable as there is a high replay value in both single-player and multiplayer modes. The game runs well and allows anybody to play with the input device of preference. Multiplayer is especially fun when people are available, despite its low online player base. Vagante can give people a run for their money when given the opportunity. At the $14.99 price tag, this game provides good fun, especially for roguelike fans. Thank you for watching my video. It's been hard to get into this, as I've been kept up with some RL stuff. I'm also trying to squeeze some time in to do a review of another roguelike game, Dead Cells. If all goes according to plan, then I'll be able to upload it within the first week of the game's launch. Again, thank you all very much, and I'll see you all until the next video.